when the peaceful cry for help, the crystalline cities of Zephyr Prime had floated in perfect harmony for over 3,000 years. Suspended by ancient gravitational manipulators, they drifted through the planet's sapphire skies like jeweled islands, their surfaces catching and refracting the light of their twin suns into spectacular rainbow cascades. The Zephyrians themselves were beings of living crystal, their translucent bodies shifting through gentle hues as emotions flowed through them like colored light through glass. Elder Shimmer stood at the edge of the High Council's observatory, watching the sunrise paint the floating gardens in shades of gold and amber. This morning should have been like any other, filled with the soft harmonics of his people's crystal song as they tended their aerial forests and studied the mysteries of the cosmos. Instead, the sky burned with a different kind of light. The ships of the Voidclaw swarm descended like a plague of metallic locusts, their hulls black as the space between stars, their intent as clear as it was terrible. The first city fell within minutes. New Haven, home to the planet's greatest artists and dreamers, simply vanished beneath a writhing mass of insectoid warriors. The Zephyrians had no weapons to speak of, no military beyond the ceremonial guards who carried staffs of light for parades and festivals. They were philosophers, scientists, gardeners of both knowledge and beauty. They had never known war because they had never conceived that such brutality could exist in a universe they believed inherently good. Elder Shimmer's crystalline form flickered from its usual calming blue to the deep red of anguish as he watched another city consumed. The Voidclaw moved like a living darkness, their chitinous bodies absorbing light itself as they swarmed over everything in their path. They didn't just destroy, they devoured, converting matter into more of themselves with each passing moment. Where beautiful crystal spires had reached toward the heavens, now only twisted metal hives remained, pulsing with alien life. Elder, the northern sectors have gone silent, whispered Harmony, a young Zephyrian whose form flickered between pink and white with terror. The evacuation ships, they're not fast enough. The swarm is spreading too quickly. Shimmer turned from the window, his ancient face reflecting the weight of millennia. How many cities remain? 7, perhaps 8, by the time the sun sets, Harmony replied, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of destruction. And our message to the Galactic Council, transmitted Elder, but their nearest response fleet is 3 cycles away. The Voidclaw will have consumed everything by then. Shimmer nodded slowly, the light within him dimming to a faint ember. The Galactic Council meant well, but they were like his own people, too civilized, too bound by protocol and procedure. They would send investigators first, then diplomats, then perhaps, eventually a military force equipped with non-lethal crowd control measures. They didn't understand that some problems couldn't be solved with words and good intentions. Prepare the quantum transmitter, Shimmer commanded, his voice gaining strength. Send our plea beyond the Council's reach. Broadcast it on all frequencies, to every corner of known space. But Elder, the power required will drain our remaining defenses completely. We'll be helpless. We're already helpless, child. But perhaps someone out there isn't. The transmitter room lay deep within the heart of their last floating city, its walls lined with resonance crystals that could amplify thoughts across the galaxy. Shimmer placed his hands on the central console, feeling the hum of power flow through his crystalline form. Around him, the surviving members of his people gathered, their bodies glowing with shared determination. They joined their minds to his, lending their strength to what might be their species' final act. The message that burst forth from Zephyr Prime was unlike anything the galaxy had ever heard. It carried not just words, but but the crystalline song of a dying people, their memories, their hopes, their desperate love for a universe that seemed to have abandoned them. It spoke of children whose laughter would soon be silenced, of gardens that would never bloom again, of 3,000 years of peace about to end in darkness. Please, Shimmer's voice echoed across the stars. We are dying. We have no weapons, no soldiers, no way to fight what comes for us. If anyone hears this, if anyone still believes that good must stand against evil, help us. We ask not for ourselves alone, but for all the peaceful worlds that will follow if the Void Claw are not stopped here. The transmission died, taking with it the last of their defensive grid. Around them, the lights flickered and went dark. In the silence that followed, they could hear the approaching drone of Voidclaw ships, growing louder with each passing moment, far beyond the rim of civilized space. The research vessel Tenacity drifted through the void between star systems. She wasn't much to look at, a converted military frigate whose best days were decades behind her. But she was home to 6 humans who had found purpose in exploring the galaxy's forgotten corners. Captain Sarah Martinez stood on the bridge, her weathered face focused on the long-range sensors as they swept the darkness for anything interesting at 45. Martinez had seen enough combat to last several lifetimes. She'd fought in the Titan Wars, survived the siege of Europa Station, and earned more commendations than she cared to count. But after 20 years of military service, she'd grown tired of taking orders from bureaucrats who'd never seen a battlefield. The Tenacity and her crew of fellow outcasts had become her new family, bound together by their shared love of discovery and their mutual inability to fit into normal society. "Captain, I'm picking up something unusual," called Dr. James Thompson from the communications station. The former combat medic had traded his battlefield skills for xenobiology, but everyone still called him Tank, a nickname earned during a particularly brutal campaign where he'd held a field hospital against impossible odds. "Define unusual, Tank," Martinez replied, moving to look over his shoulder at the scrolling data. "It's a distress signal, but not like anything in our databases. The transmission pattern is completely alien, but there's something else. Something that's making my teeth ache just listening to it." Lieutenant Zara Chen looked up from her engineering console, her dark eyes sharp with interest. "Psychic resonance. Maybe some species can embed emotional content directly into their communications." Martinez frowned. Chen was their demolitions expert turned engineer, a woman who could make explosives out of coffee grounds and rewire a fusion reactor while under fire. If she thought something was psychically active, it was worth taking seriously. "Play it back, Tank. Let's hear what has you so rattled." The message that filled the bridge was unlike anything they'd encountered in all their years of exploration. It wasn't just sound, it was pure emotion made audible. They felt the Zephyrians' terror, their desperation, their fading hope, but beneath it all was something else, something that spoke to the part of humanity that had clawed its way up from the primordial caves and refused to surrender even when all seemed lost. When it ended, the bridge was silent except for the soft hum of life. Support systems. Martinez looked around at her crew, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their faces. They were explorers now, not soldiers, but they'd all worn the uniform once. They'd all taken an oath to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "Tank." "How far?" Martinez asked quietly. The signal originated from the Zephyr system, approximately 14 days at maximum burn. "It's deep in unexplored space, Captain. No military presence, no colonial backup, no one to answer their call except us." And these Voidclaw they mentioned. Chen pulled up what little data they had on file. Theoretical threat, mostly. Council intelligence has reports of entire systems going dark in the outer rim, but nothing confirmed. If they're real, and if they're half as dangerous as that message suggests, we'd be flying into a war zone with no support and no exit strategy. Martinez nodded slowly, understanding the implications. The Tenacity was armed, but she was a research vessel, not a warship. Her crew of 6 would be facing an enemy that had apparently destroyed an entire civilization. It was suicide, plain and simple opinions. She asked, though she already knew what her people would say. They asked for help. Tank said simply, "Doesn't matter if it's hopeless." "I can rig some surprises if we're going into a fight," Chen added. "And the ship's tougher than she looks." The others nodded their agreement, and Martinez felt a familiar warmth in her chest. This was why she'd left the military's rigid hierarchy behind. These people understood what it meant to be human in a galaxy that often seemed to have forgotten. "Plot a course for the Zephyr system," she ordered. "Maximum burn, and start prepping for combat. We might not be able to save them all, but by God, we're going to try." As the Tenacity's engines roared to life, pushing them toward a distant system under siege, none of them could have imagined how their arrival would change not just the fate of the Zephyrians, but the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be human. They weren't coming as diplomats or peacekeepers. They were coming as the children of Earth, a death world that had forged them in fire, and taught them that sometimes the only answer to overwhelming darkness was to become a light that refused to be extinguished. The journey through hyperspace gave them time to prepare, though preparation seemed almost laughably inadequate given what they were flying toward. The Tenacity might have been a research vessel, but her crew had retained their military instincts. They ran combat drills, checked and rechecked their weapons, and tried to develop strategies for fighting an enemy they barely understood. The ship's modest armament included 2 plasma cannons, a torpedo launcher with 6 remaining warheads, and point defense systems designed more for debris than enemy fire. Against a swarm that had consumed an entire civilization, it seemed woefully inadequate. But Martinez had learned long ago that battles weren't won by superior firepower alone. They were won by the determination to keep fighting when any sane person would surrender. As they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyr system, the sight that greeted them would have broken the hearts of lesser beings. The beautiful garden world they'd heard described in that desperate transmission was now a scarred wasteland. The floating cities were gone, replaced by massive organic structures that pulsed with alien life. The very atmosphere seemed infected, twisted into patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Survivors?" Martinez asked, though she already feared the answer. "Scanning," Tank replied, his instruments sweeping the devastated planet below. "Wait, I'm getting something. Life signs, crystalline. In nature, hiding in the polar regions. Maybe a few thousand individuals, scattered across several locations. A few thousand, from a population of hundreds of millions." The scale of the catastrophe was almost incomprehensible, but those few thousand represented hope. They represented the reason the Tenacity had crossed half the galaxy to be here. "And the Voidclaw everywhere," Chen reported grimly. "The entire planet is infested. Their ships are in orbit, their forces are on the ground, and from what I can tell, they're still expanding." Martinez stared at the tactical display, counting the impossible odds arrayed against them. 6 humans in an aging research vessel against a swarm that had consumed a world. It should have been the end of the story before it began. Instead, she smiled. "Well," she said, settling into her command chair, "I suppose it's time to show these bugs what Deathwelders can do when someone threatens our friends." Deathwelders show their teeth. The first rule of asymmetric warfare was simple: never fight the enemy on their terms. The Voidclaw expected their prey to cower in hiding until the inevitable end, or perhaps make a desperate frontal assault that would be easily crushed. They didn't expect the tenacity to dive straight into their orbital formation, shields blazing and weapons hot, like a shark attacking a school of fish. Captain Martinez had learned her tactics in the brutal campaigns of humanity's expansion wars, where human fleets often found themselves outnumbered 10-1 by alien forces that couldn't comprehend Earth's peculiar brand of aggressive creativity. The key wasn't to win through superior force, but to create so much chaos that your enemy couldn't effectively use their advantages. "Chen, give me everything the engines have." Martinez barked as Voidclaw interceptors swarmed toward them. "Tank, target their command ship, whatever's biggest and ugliest." The tenacity screamed through the orbital blockade like a missile, her HULL groaning under the strain of maximum acceleration. Plasma bolts and bioorganic projectiles filled the space around them, but Martinez had plotted their course through the gaps in the enemy formation, using their own ships as cover against their fellows' fire. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the planet's surface," reported Chief Navigation Officer Sam Rivers, the team's former Special Forces operative who'd joined them after a classified mission went sideways. "These bugs have turned the whole world into some kind of hive structure. And our Zephyrian friends, still alive, barely. They're holed up in ice caves near the South Pole. But Captain, the Voidclaw are closing in on their position. Maybe 6 hours before they're overrun. 6 hours to save the remnants of an entire civilization." Martinez had faced worse odds, but never with stakes this high. The Zephyrians' message had made it clear that this wasn't just about one world. If the Voidclaw weren't stopped here, they'd spread across the galaxy like a cancer, consuming every peaceful species in their path. "New plan," she announced, her voice carrying across the ship's intercom. "We're going to make some friends, then we're going to teach them how to fight dirty." The Tenacity's landing in the Zephyrian refugee camp was less gentle touchdown and more controlled crash through our ice shelf. The ship's hull, designed for deep space exploration rather than atmospheric flight, protested every meter of the descent. But Chen's modifications to the landing systems held, and they touched down in a shower of steam and melted ice just as the first Voidclaw scouts crested the distant ridgeline. Martinez was the first down the ramp, her combat armor gleaming in the alien starlight. The sight that greeted her would have reduced most beings to despair. The Zephyrian survivors were a shadow of the magnificent civilization they'd once been. Their crystalline bodies were cracked and dim, their usual radiant colors faded to pale. Echoes, they huddled in the caves like broken glass, waiting for death to claim them. But Elder Shimmer stepped forward to meet the humans, and despite everything, his form still held a dignity that spoke of 3 millennia of wisdom. "You came," he said, his voice carrying harmonics of surprise and desperate hope. "We thought no one heard our call." "We heard," Martinez replied simply, "and we're here to help. But I need to know how many of you are left." "Perhaps 3,000 across all the refuge sites," Shimmer answered. "The children, the elders, those too weak to work the crystal gardens when the swarm came. We have no weapons, no way to fight back. We can only hide and hope they don't find us before." He trailed off, unable to voice the inevitable end. Martinez looked past him to the gathered Zephyrians, seeing fear in their alien features, but also something else: determination, love, the same qualities that had driven them to broadcast their message across the galaxy rather than simply accepting extinction. These weren't just victims. They were survivors who'd simply never learned how to turn their survival instincts into weapons. "That's about to change," she said, turning to her crew. "Tank, start setting up a field hospital. Some of these people need medical attention. Chen, I want you to look at their technology, see if there's anything we can weaponize. Rivers, perimeter security, and someone find me their youngest, smartest engineer." The someone turned out to be Harmony, the young Zephyrian who'd stayed with Elder Shimmer through the city's final hours. She approached the humans with the cautious curiosity of her species, her crystalline form shifting through nervous purples and blues as she studied these strange beings who'd come from the stars to help them. "You want to fight the Void Claw?" she asked, her voice tinkling like wind chimes. "But there's so many, and so strong. They consume everything they touch, turn it into more of themselves. How can anyone fight such a thing?" Martinez knelt down to meet the young alien's gaze, seeing in her the same determination that had once driven humanity to leave their birth world and claim the stars. "Because that's what my people do, Harmony. We fight impossible odds and find ways to win, but we can't do it alone. We need your help." Over the next few hours, as Voidclaw forces drew closer to their position, the most unlikely partnership in galactic history began to take shape. The Zephyrians might not have been warriors, but they were master engineers whose technology operated on principles that human science barely understood. Their gravity manipulators could move mountains. Their crystal matrices could store and redirect massive amounts of energy. Their harmonic resonators could shatter molecular bonds at the atomic level. They'd simply never thought to use any of it as weapons. Chen worked alongside Harmony and several other Zephyrian technicians, her demolitions expertise combining with their theoretical knowledge to create horrors that neither species could have achieved alone. They took the gravity manipulators that had once held beautiful cities aloft and turned them into localized singularity generators. They modified crystal matrices into energy weapons that could punch through ship armor like tissue paper. They weaponized the very resonance that had once carried the Zephyrian songs across the cosmos. "It feels wrong," Harmony confessed as they completed work on their third improvised cannon. "We are beings of creation, not destruction." "Sometimes," Chen replied, checking the weapon's power coupling, "creation requires a little controlled destruction first. You can't plant a garden in ground that's choked with weeds." Meanwhile, Tank worked to keep the refugees alive and functional, his medical training adapting to alien physiology with the flexibility that had made him legendary in combat zones across human space. The Zephyrians were suffering from more than just physical trauma. Their entire worldview had been shattered by the Voidclaw invasion. They were a species that had never known true evil, and the encounter had left them psychologically devastated. "They're not just hurt," Tank explained to Martinez as he worked on an elderly Zephyrian whose light had dimmed almost to nothing. "They're losing the will to live. Their entire culture is based on harmony and beauty. They can't process this level of brutality." "Then we show them something they can process," Martinez replied. "We show them that even in the darkest night, there are those willing to light a candle and fight back the darkness." The first wave of Voidclaw attackers came at dawn, their chitinous forms moving like liquid shadow across the ice. There were hundreds of them, their bioorganic weapons gleaming in the alien sunlight, their compound eyes reflecting the harsh landscape as they closed in on what they assumed would be easy prey. They weren't prepared for the humans to meet them halfway. Martinez led the charge herself, her combat armor boosted by Zephyrian power systems, her weapons enhanced with crystalline matrices that turned simple plasma bolts into coherent streams of annihilation. Behind her came Tank, Chen, Rivers, and the rest of the crew, each one a veteran of humanity's most brutal campaigns, each one carrying weapons that married human aggression with alien innovation. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humans moved with predatory grace between enemies that towered over them, their tactics fluid and deadly. They used the terrain, the weather, even the Void Claw's own biology against them. When conventional weapons failed, they improvised. When improvisation wasn't enough, they got creative in ways that defied galactic conventions of warfare. Chun's gravity mines turned attacking swarms into pancakes of compressed chitin. Tanks, medical nanites, reprogrammed for combat, dissolved. Void Claw bioarmor from the inside out. Rivers used sniper tactics learned in urban warfare to pick off enemy commanders from impossible distances. And through it all, Martinez coordinated their efforts with the cold precision of someone who'd learned to turn chaos into victory. But the real surprise came when the Zephyrians joined the fight. Harmony was the first, her crystalline form blazing, with new purpose as she operated one of their improvised weapons. The harmonic cannon she triggered didn't just destroy the attacking Void Claw, it unmade them at the molecular level, their screams of agony harmonizing with the weapon's resonance in ways that would have been beautiful if they weren't so utterly terrifying for our children, Elder Shimmer called out, his aged form glowing brighter than it had in decades as he powered a gravity projector that turned an entire Void Claw formation into a compressed sphere of organic matter. For our world, for our future. The other survivors took up the cry, their voices joining in the crystal song that had once celebrated life and now called for righteous vengeance. They weren't warriors by nature, but they were fighting for everything they'd ever loved, and that made them more dangerous than any army. The battle raged for hours, waves of Void Claw throwing themselves against the combined human Zephyrian defense. But each wave was smaller than the last, and the defenders' weapons grew more sophisticated with each engagement. They were learning, adapting, evolving their tactics in real time. By the time the sun set over the ice fields, the immediate threat was broken. Thousands of Void Claw bodies littered the battlefield, their organic weapons cooling in the alien air. The survivors stood among the carnage, human and Zephyrian alike, staring at what they'd accomplished together. "It's not over," Martinez said, her voice carrying across the battlefield. "This was just the first wave. They'll be back, and they'll be ready for us next time. Then we'll be ready for them," Elder Shimmer replied, his crystalline form blazing with new determination. "You've shown us something we thought impossible, Captain Martinez. You've shown us that even the most peaceful beings can find the strength to fight when their cause is just." "And you've shown us something too," Martinez replied, looking at the incredible weapons their partnership had created. "You've shown us that sometimes the greatest victories come not from human strength alone, but from the wisdom to know when to share that strength with others." As the twin suns of Zephyr Prime began to rise again, casting rainbow light across the battlefield, a new alliance was born. The Zephyrians had learned to fight, not because they loved war, but because they loved peace enough to defend it. The humans had found a purpose beyond exploration. becoming teachers and protectors for species that had never needed to learn the harsh lessons of survival. Together, they began planning their counterattack. The Void Claw had consumed one world, but they would not consume another. Not while Death Worlders and Crystal Singers stood united against the darkness. The galaxy would never be the same. In the cold reaches of space, other peaceful species intercepted fragments of the battle's aftermath. They heard the harmonized battle cries of Zephyrians learning to fight, the tactical chatter of humans turning impossible odds into victory, and the screams of an ancient evil finally meeting its match. A new message began to spread across the stars, carried not by desperate transmissions, but by the whispered rumors of those who'd witnessed something unprecedented. The message was simple but powerful. When the innocent cried for help, the children of death worlds answered. And when they answered, they didn't come alone. They came with fire, fury, and most importantly, the wisdom to teach others how to kindle their own flames against the dark. The age of passive victimhood was ending. The age of shared strength had begun, and in the deepest reaches of space, other predators began to take notice, wondering if perhaps they had chosen the wrong galaxy to infest. After all, any universe that could produce both the gentle wisdom of the Zephyrians and the fierce protection of humanity was clearly far more dangerous than it appeared. The storm had arrived, and it was just getting started.